Welcome to Richplanet TV. I'm Richard D. Hall. Today I'm in Leicestershire and I've come to speak to another UFO witness, Colin Saunders. Welcome, Colin.
Thank you.
Now then, Colin, your sighting took place in 1999 and we're going to go into that in a lot of detail because I have to say that the UFO report that you provided me with has to go down in history as the most detailed, comprehensive UFO report I've ever seen, and we're going to use some of the images that you've constructed of this report. Now, this took place in 1999. Now, just fill us in, Colin, on a little brief background on yourself, because you come from a technical background, which I think is why we've had such a very good report from you.
That's correct. Yeah, I've spent all of my life basically being a draftsman, mainly electronic drafting. Mm-hmm. I've been very well placed, if you like, to look at detail on finished projects and then produce drawings of those sort of projects. So I've been trained, if you like, over the years to look at installations, make details, and then go away, produce drawings, produce the technical documents. So on the night in question, I guess, yeah, it was very good for me. There was a lot of detail. It was a very close sighting. Mm-hmm. And then afterwards I used that information to build myself a scale model of the event.
Okay, so 1999, you're with your family in the car.
Yes,
this was in Warwickshire.
That's right. It was the 31st of March 1999 at 9:50 p.m. It's a time and date I'll never forget. But we'd been out for a bar meal. Mm-hmm. There was my wife, my daughter, and mother-in-law. Mm-hmm. We'd gone to a pub in the Warwickshire countryside called the White Lion at Paleton, which is quite close to the Fosse Way. We left there about 9:45. There was in fact another party with us who had arrived in a Range Rover with an older lady, and I remember as we pulled off from the car park, they were not far behind us, but the old lady was still getting into the Range Rover, so we went ahead, but not far ahead, but certainly we left first. Travelled through some small country lanes until we came on the Fosse Way. We turned onto the Fosse, and funnily enough, my daughter, who was 12, she said at the point, somebody in the car mentioned, there's been talk of headless horsemen down the Fosse Way. It's an old story from years ago. Mm-hmm. And my daughter said, keep our eyes open and might see him. Mm-hmm. Which was quite a coincidence, because as soon as we turned the corner onto the Fosse Way, half a mile away, there were some red lights hovering by the side of the road. Mm-hmm. Now, I've been back and measured the distance. It's exactly half a mile. We drove towards the lights, so in view all the time. And we just kept talking about them, saying it's too low to be an aeroplane, too many lights for a helicopter. There's no pylons with lights on or anything like that down the Fosse. We'd come up early and there was nothing there. So we were just all excited, to be honest. We drove towards these lights and they were really close. By the time we got to them, I would say they were no more than 100 feet away. Right. And possibly 60 feet off the ground, maybe 80 feet off the ground. And initially there was 4 big round red lights, not in a straight line, they were slightly angled to the earth. Mm-hmm. It sort of tilted at about 30, 40 degrees, something like this. And then we sort of stopped and looked at these red lights, wondering what they were. Now, at this point, I noticed that the sky around the lights started to sort of wobble, in effect, like a rippling effect, around the outside of what turned out to be a triangular-shaped craft. Mm-hmm. And once it started to ripple, you could see this object materialising. It was just like Star Trek, like decloaking right in front of our eyes around the lights. Mm-hmm. At the time that it was doing this as well, I noticed there was a little bit of condensation started to appear, like fluffy white clouds on the end of 2 wingtips, which spread either side of the red lights. Mm-hmm. There was another smaller light off to one side that I noticed. That was also got some white light around it and a little bit of this cotton wool condensation is what I would say it would be. Mm-hmm. Once we realised that it was a craft there, the craft floated its nose into the air. Now I say floated, it manoeuvred like no other craft I've seen. I've been in the aircraft industry, I've been to air shows, I know what craft look like when they move about. This thing was floating. It looked like it was underwater, like a submarine, the way that the nose goes up and down on a submarine. Alright,
and Colin, we'll bring in your model at this point.
Basically there were just these 4 big lights along the back. Mm-hmm. And like I say, they weren't parallel to the ground, they were tilted at an angle. Now I also noticed one small light off to one side.
Move it a little bit closer to your body, there, if you keep it there.
Now I also noticed during the course of there was a little light off to one side. It turns out that would be the one underneath the nose at the front, but at this point we didn't know that. We could just see 4 lights at the back and one under the front. We're starting to get this little cotton wool type little cloud effect around the tips of these two ends of the triangle. And it was at this point that the triangle tilted up in the air, but it rose, like I say, like a submarine underwater. Now once it did that, we could see on top of the surface all these lines interlocking, look like girders off a pylon. Now the grey that I've shown on the model was in fact like liquid. It was going up and down the surface. It was underneath the white lines, but it looked like it was rippling from top to bottom. I've described it as like a lake at night when the moon's shining on it, it's got slight rippling on it. That's the effect that we could see underneath the white lines. Now it obviously wasn't distortion, because the white lines on top that were interlocking were not distorted in any way. So it looked like a transparent skin filled with water that was running from top to bottom, grey, but whether that was boiling liquid nitrogen, hydrogen or whatever, I've got no idea what it was.
When you say grey, might it have been mercury or something like that?
It's darker than the mercury. Mercury's a bit silver, this was a bit darker than that.
Right, okay.
A little bit darker than the model actually. But like I say, all the other lines on top of the craft were not distorted in any fashion, so that rules out heat distortion or electromagnetic fields, as it would have affected the whole of the craft. These box sections came off the surface and they interlocked. I've tried to reproduce the pattern here, but I can't bring the exact pattern to mind, but it's along this ratio of the lines you can see on the surface of the model. Now, the strangest thing happened at this point, and there was 4 of us in the car looking at this occurrence. Basically, for me, at one point, it was almost like somebody had put some binoculars up in front of my eyes, and I could see some of the detail on the craft a lot closer than I should have been able to see it. I could see this nose, a close-up of the nose, and I could also see how the craft had been manufactured on the side here. This white central core, the top and the bottom of the craft rolled over the edge like a hovercraft or like the pastry on a pie, but there was no nuts and bolts, no rivets, no welding seams, nothing at all. And then the next thing I remember is being back in the car shouting, "Stop, stop, let's get out, I want to have a closer look."
You have got some close-up drawings that you've done as well.
I have, yes.
Do you want to just quickly show them and we'll... Okay.
Now I could see that nose. It was like I was standing in front of it. It was so close to me I couldn't see the rest of the surface of the craft. I could only see this round nose, and I remember thinking just how spherical and beautifully it had been manufactured.
Okay. And you did say that if the craft had tilted the other way, downwards, you think it would have hit the road. It was so low to the ground.
When the craft tilted, it was so close to the ground that if it had tilted from the centre of the body, it would have struck the ground. So when the craft actually rose, the rear end stayed exactly where it was on the craft as the nose rose in the air. Like I say, if it had tilted from the centre, I think it probably would have struck the ground. It was so low. And certainly, if it had tilted from the nose down, it would have been a collision. So the back sort of stayed where it was, and the nose, like I say, rose into the air like this submarine underwater. Which I'm guessing might be anti-gravity, but I don't really know the answers to that.
We'll come on to that.
From this view, the next view that I remember seeing is a side view of the craft. And here we have it. This is showing the central white core of the craft, and I've tried to show here how the top and the bottom rolled over like this hovercraft skin effect or pastry on a pie. But the thing I remember about this particular view is there was no nuts and bolts, no rivets, no welding. It almost been sympathetically put together. The next thing I remember from this view basically is being back in the car and shouting, "Stop, stop, let's get out, I want to have a look." Now my ex-wife reversed the car into a gateway. Now unfortunately in doing so, she pulled forward slightly, which blocked the view of the craft. There was a hedge in the way. And I thought to myself, well, I bet if it's going to go now. When we get out of the car, it'll be gone. Sure enough, when we got out of the car, the craft had disappeared. But what I would say is we stood there, and in the distance flying away from us was the largest flying craft I've ever seen in my life, bearing in mind my aircraft experience from the past. It was a huge craft. It was the size of a football field. It got 4 red lights at the back again, but this time on the enormous wings there was a white light at the end of each wing. It wasn't strobing, it was just shining. It was shining up the surface of the craft on both sides, and this huge thing was flying away from us. We could only assume that the small craft had gone back to the larger craft.
So you think it was 2 separate crafts then, Colin?
I do. Now, I've never had any experiences with UFOs before, and I've never been involved with the subject. In my first reports, I said to Omar Fowler that I thought the craft had changed size because it was such a strange experience all round. I thought the small craft had grown into a bigger craft. Once I started researching on the internet and finding out about UFOs, which I always thought were saucer shaped until I had my own experience, then I believe that was a mother craft. They talk about motherships and small crafts going back to them, and I believe that's what took place on that particular night.
And there is another case of somebody allegedly seeing a larger craft with a smaller triangular craft docking onto it.
That's correct. A while ago I wrote an article for the Flying Saucer magazine, FSR, and in that article I did show a drawing that had come from Omar's journal that he produces, which showed a large triangle, and inside the larger triangle there was a small triangle and a square block as well.
Right.
That led me to believe that the small triangle docks with the larger triangle. Maybe that's what some of these lines upon the surface are for. Maybe these are a docking mechanism, I don't know.
All right, and now after you'd given a detailed account of all of this, Colin, you then saw a drawing of one of the Belgian craft. Just tell us about what you thought when you saw that.
Well, I was just absolutely amazed when Omar sent me one of his journals on the Flying Triangle mystery, and there was a guy in Belgium, in Stockis, I think the town was called, who had a triangle fly over his head. Now he did a detailed drawing of the underneath of the triangle. Now exactly the same on the underneath of his triangle were these lines in relief, these lines coming off the surface, as you can see on our triangle. We only seen the top and the back. So what I did, I took the drawing of the Belgium triangle and produced the bottom. Now his lines are also coming off the triangle in relief. It seemed too much of a coincidence to me that a UFO with triangles on the surface would also have these on the bottom. I believe it was the same craft or same series of craft that the guy in Belgium had seen. So basically I drew these on the computer. I took his sighting of the underneath, I took our sighting of the top and the rear, and put them together to produce this basically scale model.
And any noise at all?
Absolutely none whatsoever, and more importantly there were no smells. You couldn't smell anything. There was no fuel being burnt from like a conventional engine. I mean, some people have said to me, was it perhaps the stealth fighter or the stealth bomber? Well, at that distance, I mean, this thing was only like 100 feet away from us. You know, the stealth fighter, the F-117 weighs, I think it's 3,800 pounds, but it's only got two engines which produce 30,000 pounds of thrust. It hasn't got enough, but if it had 38,000 pounds of thrust, it would have to stand on its end with engines on full blast just to hover. This craft was not doing that. This craft was manoeuvring around with no noise whatsoever in the most peculiar fashion.
Right. So if it was a stealth aircraft, it's using a propulsion system that hasn't been disclosed yet, presumably.
That's right, yes. Yeah. I do know the F-117, they do describe it as a flying brick. It's just full of electronics that make it fly. Without the electronics, it wouldn't even fly. It can't glide, it certainly can't hover. So it definitely wasn't anything along those lines.
Okay, and there's another interesting image in your report of a photograph of your model taken from a particular angle, where you think that some people who maybe witness a UFO see a triangle as a saucer.
Yes, I remember reading an article about triangles and why they look different to different people when there is a UFO sighting. It depends from the angle that you view the craft. In the report that I wrote, I tried to show that if you put the triangle into different angles, you can get a different sort of triangle.
It was a diamond initially when you saw it, wasn't it?
You can get the full triangular shape. But if you actually turn the triangle towards you, and if you look at it head on, I mean, it does look like a flying saucer. But obviously, you know, you can have a side view, you get a different shaped triangle. I've also heard that these things actually fly backwards as well. I mean, we didn't see it leave the area where we had the sighting, but certainly the nose rose into the air, which led me to believe it was going to leave point first. I must admit, when we came across the lights, the object was totally invisible, and it was just quite astounding when it did materialise. It didn't change its position, it was just stationary, and it materialised around the lights. It was almost, because the whole event was quite peculiar, it was almost like it had come from one dimension to another, like the lights had arrived first and the craft followed it. That's the way my logical mind sort of looked at it. I couldn't see the point of why the craft would be invisible, but the lights would be.
Right.
You would think they'd both be visible or both invisible.
Right.
But for some reason, it gave itself away with the lights and then eventually became solid. But once it started to materialise, it was almost like looking at a perspex triangle that you could see through.
A perspex triangle.
Then slowly it became solid and became metallic.
Right. So we can take from this then, assuming everything that you're saying is true, that either there's some secret group, because I don't think that that's in the hands of the RAF, there's some secret group that has developed highly advanced technology behind closed doors and they're flying it over crossroads in Warwickshire, or it's something else.
Yes. My own personal feeling from the whole experience that it's definitely not one of ours. I've never seen anything quite like it. The way it manoeuvred, the lack of sound, the lack of smell, fuel.
But what about, you know, I've read that they started developing electrogravitic propulsion systems from the 1950s onwards, which are silent and possibly can produce the kind of motions that you're talking about. Now, whether they can become invisible or not due to a field effect, I don't know. But assuming that they have got the technology to do that, you still don't think it's...
No, I don't. The thing that makes me feel that, there's a few reasons actually, but one of them, this thing was under total control. It hadn't lost control, it wasn't unstable, it knew exactly what it was doing. Now, if this is a secret project from the military, what are they doing in the Leicestershire countryside, jumping out on people, driving along in the cars? It just doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
The craft seemed to be in no panic to get away from us. And then there was the other craft as well in the vicinity. I mean, they talk about the Oz effect. I mean, this is one of the things that nobody else saw what took place. But once it had stopped and we stood in the gateway looking at the larger triangle disappearing, I can tell you that cars started coming up and down the road and other air traffic seemed to materialise. It was like for a brief period it was just us and the craft and nobody else. In fact, I mentioned earlier about the Range Rover that left behind us. They actually arrived home before us. And in fact, when we got back, not only were they home, they were the old lady who struggled to get in and out. She was in the house. They'd all got out the Range Rover, so they'd been home for some period of time, maybe as much as 10 minutes.
Right, so you do feel that there was possibly some form of time dilation or something not quite right with the timing of the thing?
Yes, although we did check our watch and it was 9:50, but then we don't know exactly what time we left the pub.
Right.
But we do know we got home after the other vehicle that left after us, and that during the course of the event everything was very, very quiet. Now also I've alluded to the fact that I believe the close viewing may have been an out-of-body experience. I don't know, I'm open to suggestions on that. But I will say that after the event, not prior to it, because it's my first experience of anything paranormal, I have had other experiences. That makes for me 100% certain that this is not a man-made object.
All right, and Colin, just hold it there, because we're going to go for a break and we'll be talking more about Colin Saunders' UFO research after this.